the level of trauma awareness for our medical community in Springfield and beyond. So these are some of the pieces that we wanted to kind of lay out today and to talk about. This is a lot of information, and I know that. And so my favorite way for us to process information is to do so in the context of conversation. So I want to kind of open it up. Thoughts, questions, things that maybe come to your mind that you're aware of, or maybe things that you heard that just really make you angry or upset as you hear those and process those. Yes. Yeah. 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 Right. Right. And another big thing that we see with generational trauma and generational poverty. Yeah, because if you grew up in a household where maybe someone never taught you how to manage money because it was just always kind of, you know, living paycheck to paycheck, doing the best that we can, there was never the ability to sit down and make a budget and sit down and talk about savings accounts and, you know, those kind of things. You're exactly right. And we see that impact all the time. And I think it goes back to, how do we teach people those skills and really in a trauma-informed manner sit down with people on their level and do so in a way that doesn't come across as condescending? Because I think we have that problem a lot when we're trying to teach life skills. It comes across very high to low, and we've got to meet people right where they are.
Yeah, I would just add too that there is no fixing problems when it comes to trauma. Like, we can help someone get into housing, but it's that transitional support then that's needed for that individual. And I see this a lot in the foster care system. We see it as a huge success when a family reunifies and kids get to go home, but then that family needs a whole new layer of support system because it's hard for kids. And it can be traumatic, even if it's the best outcome for them to go back to mom and dad, to leave a family maybe they've grown to love, or they've adjusted to a school, they've adjusted to some of this to go back, and then to have to adjust to living together again, to adjust to some different sets of rules and ways of belonging, ways of being. And so there is no degree of someone doesn't need support, like what you were sharing. Like, there are layers of support and trauma-informed support that someone needs their entire life.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And we're also seeing some interesting national work done, and I don't think we have enough data on it just yet, but we're seeing some interesting work where individuals who normally are focusing on childhood interventions, right, positive mentors, positive people, but they're also starting to see this correlation that when we also at the same time put positive people around parents and caregivers, that means just as much to a child, because they see someone as being a positive person in their life too, because they're also making a positive impact on my parents. They're also making a positive impact on my caregivers. And that's a really interesting way that I think we've got to be looking at things, is looking differently at not just, you know, interventions for kids, but interventions for families and family units. Anybody else have a thought, question? Elisa.
Just want to share how important it is to remember that trauma-informed care can be applied in every interaction we have with somebody, and that is something that I have to remember every time I speak to someone. I was always reminded what you said about trauma-informed care and the systems that can trigger it. Real flow with habits.
Right.
I know statistically, almost 100% of people, there is a number of people who've not experienced any ACEs whatsoever, but the majority of adults have at least experienced one traumatic event in their life. And the way that we all try to lead in all the programs we run is just assume whoever you're talking to has had something traumatic happen to them. If we assume that maybe there's triggers, we assume that maybe some of those emotional defenses could be trauma, then we're going to respond to them with compassion versus responding with them with judgment. And then if it comes out that they don't have that, they're one of that rare group of people that may not have had those degrees of trauma. But we're always going to be more sensitive and compassionate if we just question, maybe that behavior is a trauma trigger. Maybe that behavior is in response to something that they had happen to them, and I'm going to try to come at it from someone who's compassionate and understanding to them, and then we're going to be able to work through that a lot more easier than if I just get frustrated by the way they're acting.
Yeah, especially if you're dealing with the same people over and over, right? Sometimes it's easy to be like, somebody else, can you speak to this person? Can you handle this person? But Elisa, like you said, that has always been my challenge, is like sometimes the hardest people to work with are the people who need me to try the hardest. And they need me to try the hardest in different ways until we find a way that connects. And so, you know, I've got individuals that we work with regularly in an outreach setting with ACE scores of 8, 9, and 10. And, you know, sometimes we tried one way and it blew up in my face. And so it's like, okay, see you tomorrow or see you the next day, and we'll try again, and we'll try a different way to talk or a different way to connect, or until we find some degree of common ground. The more that I'm willing to persist in that place, right, the more that I earn trust, the more that I earn that relational capital, so that they do start to open up a little bit. You know, the very first time I see them and I say, hey, what was your, you know, how did you handle trauma when you were a kid? And they're like, you know, I've heard some interesting things if I would have tried that. But the more that we connect and we find things like same football teams that we like to follow, or similar foods, or, you know, different things like that, we just start to build those relationships. And I think we live in a time and a space in our society, we just don't do relationships very well, especially ones that are hard, and especially ones that we can say, that's just really hard for me, I'm going to draw a boundary, I'm not even going to try. And so I think the lesson for all of us is, when it's hardest to try is probably when it's most important to try, especially with people. Any other thoughts, questions? Any aha moments? Was any of this new to you? Had any of you heard some of this before? Were you surprised by any of these numbers locally?
I was surprised at the average score. I was surprised at that.
Which ACE score? The outreach score or the sheltered survey score? Yeah.
You don't think about people that have a job, who have a home, who have a family, as experiencing trauma. Some people look at their lives and say, oh, they've got it perfect. They've got what I wish I had. But you don't know their backstory.
Right.
And everybody has a backstory.
Right. Absolutely.
I think one of the things I would say, I don't know that any of the information that you provided was surprising to me, but I'm glad that the data is there and might help communicate to some other people. I think about too that with a town that has a quarter of our population that's living in poverty, what are the other 75% doing about it? You know, and how much capacity is there to help them to do something? And the way that things are, it's not necessarily like causational. It's not like if people got paid $30 an hour for their job, then they wouldn't have any problem with trauma. Because that's not how they like they stop using drugs. No, like that's not how that works. So it's all very interrelated. But at the same time, raising wages would be nice.
Right.
You know, or having more affordable housing would make a big difference. And I just think too that it just seems like, I mean, I'm a recent foster parent, but and the system is just so strange. It's just not enough. There's not enough money. There's not enough caseworkers. They're not getting paid enough to do their jobs. There's too many people to take care of. They're doing the best that they can with what they have available to them, and like, and it's just, and it sucks for the kids. right? And their families, right? It's just like, and it's also just like, well, this is what we have. Right. And I think too, when for people who haven't had as much trauma in their lives, it's easy to look at decisions that other people make and think, well, that's a dumb decision. Why would you do something like that? That doesn't make any sense. And we sometimes ask it like it's a question, but really it's a judgment. Why on earth would you do something like that? And it's like, well, somebody got bit by a dog when they were 5 years old, and then a dog barks and they flinch. That's why. Because they got bit by a dog when they were 5 years old. That's a completely natural, normal reaction to something that was traumatic to them. And so I think too, like, so many people, they're making the best decisions that they can, given their life experience, given the information that they have, given all of it. They're doing the best that they can, and it doesn't look like that on the outside.
I saw somebody once say trauma always comes back in the form of a reaction. Always. A reaction to something, a reaction to stress, a reaction to a noise, a reaction to a memory, a reaction to a smell. Like it embeds in who we are. It encodes in our minds. Like we can't biologically separate from what we've experienced. And so you're exactly right. I think when we see those reactions, that's the moment for us, whether we're in ministry or healthcare, or we're in legal services, law enforcement, we're a community member, a neighbor, a volunteer, whatever that looks like that's your moment right there to say, what's behind that reaction? Like that reaction may not have made sense to me, so clearly there's probably something behind it. And it's usually a really great starting point for conversations, for trying to understand what's happening and trying to dig into that a little bit more.
I also would just add, we have sound now.
I know.
Ashley, you brought up a really important point too. There is such a thing as secondary trauma, and like that other 75% of our population, we need to be loving on our people who are in poverty, our high trauma individuals, but we also need to be loving on those people who are working every single day in those fields. I work with a lot of caseworkers, and there's a lot of caseworkers that are dealing with this secondary trauma. And like you said, they're not getting paid enough to be able to go on vacation and self-care the way they need to. And many of the ones that I adore are the ones who never take a break, and they need to take a break. A lot of healthcare workers are in that with COVID, especially. We see a lot of nurses and doctors that are so burned out, but they're so burned out to the point of being traumatized. We do see that in law enforcement. We see that in a lot of these first responders, and they need our compassion too. And so I think there's a lot of different ways we can love on people in trauma. One of those is by loving on the people who are put there to work first and foremost, like face to face every single day with those individuals. And sometimes it's as simple as like bringing them cookies and just telling them like, we see you. You matter. Like, thank you for what you do. Because a lot of times in those positions, they don't get thank yous. They don't get, because they're dealing with people in crisis. That state of high elevated stress, it's hard to see sometimes the good someone's doing for you or the extent that they're going to bat for you. And so for us to be able to say like, thank you for what you do can go a very, very long way for some of those in that secondary trauma risk place.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions, thoughts? Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. 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 Right, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we have some good programs in Springfield. The problem is the need is way bigger than the capacity. And so those programs are always full right now. I haven't been able to get a family into Salvation Army's family enrichment program in years. You know, Harmony House is always full. You know, Catholic Charities has the Rancho now. It is always full. And then, exactly. Right. Right. Absolutely. Right. Well, and there's a whole piece of that where asking for help alone is a trigger, right? It triggers our trauma response anyway, because that's hard to do. And sometimes that keeps us, just like the woman I was telling you about who didn't want to go to court for sentencing just because of that trigger that being in that room was going to be, picking up a phone and asking for help and having to be told no over and over again and having to tell your story over and over again is just incredibly re-traumatizing for people. So I don't know if you know this, Janessa, but like Roots of Community, one of the components that we have in that is 2 campuses. One of those campuses would be a family campus. So it would be for parents with kiddos, and it would start with one phase, which would be one apartment complex, 27 apartments. It would also have an on-site 24-hour daycare center where we can work with those families and we can make sure that parents have the ability to work a job when they're able to, and they have quality, safe, good, reliable childcare. It also gives us a space to do family therapy, art therapy, music therapy, to have some of those conversations, to do parenting classes, to do budget classes, and those kind of things. And it's a transitional model. So the whole idea behind it is this is a place you could come and stay for a short period of time while you catch your breath. Your kids are safe. You're not trying to stay in a hotel where, you know, we're surrounded by things kids don't need to be surrounded by, but you're in a safe space where you can get ahead finally, and learning how to be housed, learning how to do that successfully, and then providing aftercare to those families once they have been able to move into an apartment or a duplex or a house or whatever that looks like, to make sure that we're still doing well and we're still succeeding. So that's what we're trying to do about that problem. But again, it's bigger than just those 27 apartments. We need lots of those kind of solutions to solve this issue for our community. Yeah, absolutely. So check it out on Roots. It's got a whole bunch of different details there that you might find interesting. Absolutely. Any other questions, you guys? Awesome. Elisa. Yeah, we did this over the course of a year. So it was all of the very end of 2020. It started in December and it ran through December of 2021. So yeah. Any other questions? Okay, so let me give you a few action items because I'm a big believer. We leave with steps, right? So here are your steps. Your steps are, first of all, to be aware of your own level of trauma personally and your level of trauma awareness. Like, did I know this, or do I maybe need to learn some more about this? Do I need to maybe dig some more into this to better understand trauma and its impact on people and on health and on reactions and communication and relationships? If you start processing that and you're like, where do I even start? Get a hold of one of the two of us. You know, both of us, this is kind of where we are super passionate and nerdy. And so we've got lots of resources, lots of ideas we can help get you connected to. Again, on our website, we'll have some links to different resources to help you further your own level of trauma awareness. Also, assess the level of trauma awareness of the organizations you're involved with. So whether that is your workplace, whether that is your faith community, whether that is volunteer civic organizations, whatever that looks like, kind of pay attention around you to how people talk to people, how people interact with people. Is there an improvement that can be made in that organization, that entity's level of trauma awareness? One of the things that we're going to be doing a lot of over the next couple of years is taking this information and going out into communities. I know I've already talked to some people at Jordan Valley. We've already talked to people at Mercy Hospital about coming and doing specific trainings to talk about how do we tailor this to medical professionals, education professions, law enforcement, all of those different kinds of pieces. And so the last piece of this is, what can be done? Like, what can you do? Whether that's you getting involved in something that's existing or you helping to create something that maybe fills some of these gaps that we're talking about. So if you work or are connected to, any one of those issues that we talked about, how can you be a part of us becoming a more trauma-informed community? Because I really think, we can throw a lot of Band-Aids at problems, but we are not going to see the poverty number in our community decrease. We're not going to see the level of homelessness in our community decrease. We're not going to see the number of kiddos in foster care decrease. We're not going to see the number of addictions and overdoses and crimes decrease and stay decreasing until we finally connect all these dots and we really start to address trauma in our community. So that is something I'm incredibly passionate about. I know Holly shares that passion, and we would be happy to have those conversations with anyone else who wants to find ways to get involved in that conversation and those efforts. So that's all that we have for you guys. Feel free to stick around, ask questions, process things with us, but I just really appreciate you coming to connect. I think we had significant technical difficulties, so we're probably going to re-record this, just the two of us at some point, and we'll repost this online because I think our Facebook feed cut off partway through. So it may not be there for you to share right now, but we'll have a video up that you can share with organizations and people in your world to kind of say, hey, I want you to think about this. Can we maybe go to coffee and talk about this? So be looking for that. We'll get that up here really